Hi everyone, meet Jin. Jin is a political scientist. A political scientist is someone who studies the politics and government of a country. Some political scientists study political structures, which are types of governments that countries have. For example, a political scientist might study how social media is heavily regulated in a country with an authoritarian government. This means that people do not have the ability to say what they want on the internet. Other political scientists work as analysts. An analyst writes articles discussing important political events and topics. For example, an analyst might write an article discussing the amount of votes that a president received in the national election. Right now, Jin is preparing to go to an American history conference. At the conference, political scientists, historians, archivists, and archaeologists will all meet up to talk about their current research projects. At the conference, Jin is going to host a roundtable discussion to talk about his research on how the government was first formed in the U.S. A roundtable discussion is where a group of professionals come together to have a discussion. At the beginning of the discussion, Jim is going to ask the group the following question to start a conversation for his roundtable. The question is, why were Americans worried about the new government of the United States? Next, Jin is going to explain that the American people were nervous about the new government and wanted to make sure that the American government would operate according to the needs of the American people. The Constitutional Convention was a meeting held in 1787 where Americans discussed what their new independent nation would look like. This was a defining moment in American history because the American people got to decide what form of government would rule over the United States. Next, Jin is going to explain that he uses primary sources to provide evidence to support his argument. Primary sources are sources that were written while an event was taking place in the past. For example, diaries and newspaper articles that were written at the time of an event happened are primary sources. Jin shows the group a primary source. It is a copy of a letter written by Henry Knox. Henry Knox was a general in the American Army. Knox was writing a letter to George Washington, who was the commander of the American Army. In the letter, Knox wrote that the source of the evil is the nature of the government. This primary source shows that some Americans were suspicious that the government would turn against the people. Jin shows the group another primary source, a letter written by James Madison, who was writing to George Washington in 1787. In this letter, Madison is worried about the future government of the U.S. He wants to make sure that it is fair and balanced. He proposes that states are represented based on how many people live in the state. This means that smaller states have less representatives because they have smaller populations. Jin explains that Madison's proposal was included in the final draft of the Constitution, which showed that people wanted to ensure the government could represent everyone in the U.S. Jin concludes his roundtable by explaining to the group that primary sources can be used to understand how many people were nervous because they wanted to make sure the government was run by the people for the people. Now it's your turn to think like a political scientist and go on an adventure.